This is our first symposium of the day. This is the fourth for the Biennale, so we had 3 online symposium. And so I'm going to introduce Sherry Dobbin, who we've already talked about a few times today, and we'll talk about you again. And Sherry's then going to moderate this panel. So Sherry Dobbin, Sherry's the founder and executive director of SRD Culture Limited, and she is a cultural strategist and producer with significant experience within the public realm. Mine's a little different than May's intro, so we're adding little different bits and pieces. She was also the first keynote, as you know, of our Biennale, and if you haven't checked out her keynote, you can do so at any time. Just hop on our website, and you can click on the link and watch it. And she has contributed to one of our publications, so the Provocations on Media Architecture. So I will also not be gifting that to you because you're getting it in the mail next week. She's written an article for Arc Daily. We're still working on that. It's going to come out soon, and is moderating this next symposium. So it's been a pleasure to work on this also with our one of our partners, Cadillac Fairview. So I wanted to thank Cadillac Fairview. We met numerous times over the last year, so it was a really nice partnership, really collaborative. You know, from the start, they said, you know, how can we really be integrated into the program? And I talked about the themes, especially civic creative commercial was one that was really resonating. And from there, we just kind of built the panel and thought about how we could bring some people together to speak on that across different disciplines. Yeah, I'm a big fan of everyone on this panel and the moderator, so I'm just going to hand it over to Sherry to keep things going here.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody, for coming back from lunch. So it's been exciting to be here in person as well, and to listen, actually, to the numerous achievements and the practice of those in the creative industries and how they've made their way into development, architecture, engineering, technological product design. Yesterday, got to participate in a workshop where we discovered that we could immediately create AR realities from the digital commons related to geographic locations and also discuss the related ethics, about that. And this morning, we got to hear about space history's resonance and their relationships to the multiplicity of peoples who cross into our spaces. So we cannot ignore context and its role as a collaborator and the many impressions on lands and places. So meanwhile, while all this has been happening, cities have been increasingly become exhibition spaces for art, particularly in densely populated areas that already contain or are to be built to feature a high concentration of media architecture infrastructure, such as LED screens and projections, and also responsive building into the facades. So following on our theme of commercial, civic, and creative, we have 3 panelists with whom we can delve into the details of the realities of making these works happen. How do you create, manage, and program for these spaces? And on our preparation call, we already started to generate different kinds of requests, actually, that we have for improvements or cautions. So what we're going to do, our panelists are first going to give a little bit of context about their role in the city as exhibition space, a quick taste, an example of their work, and a successful exhibition and why they feel this to be a successful exhibition. Then we're going to enter into a discussion, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. And I will tell you, these 3 individuals have significant experience in many different areas around the world, so please get your questions ready. This is the time, whether it's a small granular one or a larger ethical one, they'll be able to help you with this. So we have Kim Heppler, who is the Senior Director for Client Design and Delivery at Cadillac Fairview, who is sitting to the left. Next, we'll have Julian Sleath, who is the General Manager of the Yonge Dundas Square, and also in an email discovered that he was the first employee of the Bentway. And then last, we've got Cheryl Catterall, who is a creative director at Moment Factory, and also Jin Fan, who is the founder and CMO of ClearLED. Unfortunately, is not going to be able to join us today, but because she's worked with Cheryl on a collaboration, Cheryl is going to be able to speak a bit about their joint collaboration. So the first thing I'm going to do is call up Kim Heppler. I am going to seamlessly turn this into a slideshow by hitting this button. Maybe. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for that. It's a great introduction. I have the opportunity of working in the architecture and design department at Cadillac Fairview, and one of the we divide the team up into landlord architecture and design and client design, and I head up that team. So the idea of digital media within the commercial aspect hits me from a larger perspective, such as something like this, but also from a smaller perspective when we start to work in smaller scales with client storefronts. So I wanted to start off with this slide. I think it's just a beautiful shot of a collaboration that we did with an artist named Aude Moreau, and this was in 2017 for Nuit Blanche. It was presented by Cadillac Fairview and TD, and it was a piece that was done to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the TD Center. And so obviously playing, kind of playing on the whole idea of mise van der Rohe and less is more. Why this is interesting is that it's completely low-tech in the sense that there is no digital screen. These are done with turning lights on and off, and obviously, and I'm by no means trying to make it sound easier than it was, but it's definitely not digital. But I guess the interesting aspect is we have something like this in 2017, and then, how do we jump to this? Which is an actor. I have to say I'm not totally up on every single thing he does, but I know that he was in one of the Marvel movies, and his name is Simu Lee, and it's quite interesting to see how commercial has come into this whole aspect of public exposure with a lot of these clients, or a lot of these celebrities. They actually are, using this digital screen that we own in the Dundas and Yonge area, the media screen, which is, I guess, as of June, it was the tallest one in Canada, and I think it's ClearLED. I can't remember who it is. That's taller than us now. But in any case, it's interesting. It really made us, when we look at the aspect of commercial and public and private, we're projecting here onto a screen, an architectural screen that represents a large amount of square footage and projects into an area that anybody can look at. And so I think with Cadillac, one of the aspects for us to look at is this public and private partnership. And again, reflecting back on this screen, we look at the aspects of presenting private, commercial advertisements, as well as, and that's on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is a presentation that we did in regards to Veterans Day, Remembrance Day, actually. And it's, we've been able to work this screen so that approximately, I believe it's 10% of the ad space is reserved for ourselves so that we can put our own advertising up there. And then, of course, we work with retailers. Sometimes we will co-brand with them. But all of the experience of working on these presentations is very much about looking at what the intention is for the advertisement. And we have every single one of the creatives that come through are reviewed by the team at Cadillac Fairview. There's a complete list of what can and cannot go up there. But I do think it's important that we have some space reserved for our own presence. And I think we've talked about this, we actually need to do a better job of that, really kind of understanding how we can make something a little bit more memorable or make it resonate really with what's happening out in that square. The other aspect I wanted to talk a little bit about, and we're starting to come down in scales a bit, and bringing it more to the interior, is this idea of immersive architecture. And this is an image from the Canada Goose store that's at our property in Sherway Gardens. I think this is the only one in North America that has the immersive aspect where you actually don't really buy anything in the store. It's more of an experiential moment. And we worked a lot with Canada Goose and their designers. this was really about having an experience when you come into the store, from the moment that you walk in, and a little hard to see, but there's a gentleman walking on a digital implementation on the floor that cracks. It looks like ice, and as you walk over it, it cracks. And then you get into the areas within the store, and you will see the products on display. You don't necessarily try anything on there, or have racks of clothes to look at. It's a different way of experiencing retail, in that you'll see some samples, you can try it, you can take the coats into what the larger image is, which is the freezer, and it's a glorified snow box. It basically is an area that they can control the temperatures, real fake snow comes through, but the idea is that you can see what it's like with the jacket. So it's a different way of looking at retail and thinking about what those experiences are, and I think when we think about where retail is heading from a digital media perspective, it's really important to understand the importance of these experiences, because long gone are the days where a store will open and you will just come in and shop or experience. There's got to be something else that's going to draw you, or at least pique your imagination. This is a installation, talking about immersive again, that's the Louis Vuitton store in Las Vegas. And of course it's Las Vegas, so there's always a component of drama to it. But one of the things that's so interesting about this is the ability to change the presentation, to change the exterior, to really, it can feature the colors that or the types of leather, or the colorways that they're focusing on for that season. They can put up any of the sort of content or art direction that they've been working on with their campaigns. And it is a bit immersive in the sense that it moves, there's an activity to it, but it's changeable. And that ties into the last bit that I wanted to talk about, actually, which is digital as architectural skin. And this is something that kind of hits close home for me, because we have so many clients that want to be using digital media in their stores. And, you know, many of you, everybody has seen a digital screen in the window. They're presenting, they may have a campaign that they're doing, they may have it brand related. But once we start to get into a situation where we're experiencing something like this, which is the Hollister store on Fifth Avenue in New York, where the digital media is actually acting as the architectural skin. So we start to have responsibilities, and the retailer starts to have responsibilities. We've created something called a digital media rider, which basically means that if you're using digital in your storefront, you do have a responsibility to maintain it like you would a material. You know, if this was a completely tiled storefront and a tile came down, you would need to replace that. The same kind of idea. But it also speaks to the kind of content that's being projected on there. So for us, we don't have stores that have something to this extent, but we've got something like this in Carrefour Laval, which is Psycho Bunny, which is a new brand to come to Canada. And digital media is something that they use as another type of material within their stores. Adidas is doing it now as well. And it's really kind of an interesting way of giving the retailer some flexibility, but there is a responsibility as well. And I was mentioning to you this idea of a digital rider. It's important because it calls out, not that we want to control what the content is, but we definitely want to make sure that it's a lifestyle presentation. We don't want it to be this third-party advertising taking place of what would be architectural materials. So having said that, I think I'm still on page 1 of my notes, but page 5 of my slides, so that worked out really well. So classy all the time. So I'm gonna pass over to Julian.
Thank you, that was fascinating. And a shout out to Cadillac Fairview, because they are actually, they're great local stakeholders, and we have to support every company at the moment through these times of change. Anyhow, I am Julian Sleath, General Manager of Yonge Dundas Square. I'm from a technical production background. I came to Canada to be the Technical Director of the Canadian Opera Company originally. I worked for 6 years on Nuit Blanche in this city, so I know a few faces in the room from trying to put video and other multimedia works across the city for one night only, repeatedly for 6 years of one night only. And more recently, as mentioned, I was the first employee of Project Under the Gardener, which became the Bentway. And Dave and Imi and others here were the first video project that we did was to open the Bentway was thanks to these guys. So thank you both for that too. Anyhow, I should move slides on, shouldn't I? That's what we're supposed to do. Find the right box. There we go. Yep, so here we are. We're going to switch to, so Yonge Dundas Square was created by the City of Toronto in 1998, opened in 2003. It expropriated 8 buildings in the area, including what was the Salvation Army men's hostel, various shoe stores, a car park. And the square came about because a number of the potential developers in the area I'm going to be controversial, didn't want another retail space in the centre. And at the same time, the City of Toronto sort of wanted a space where they could host commercial events. So the other 5 civic squares in Toronto, Nathan Phillips Square, Mel Lasper Square, David Picker Square, Albert Campbell Square, Etobicoke Civic Square, cannot take commercial events. That's not their mandate. You have to be a not-for-profit or charity to use those locations. Yonge Dundas Square was also set up to not cost the city any money, but that's a whole other conversation. So around us, you can see from this slide, most of the rotation, screen rotation, is given over to commercial advertising partners. And in the realm of transparency, in 2017, in a partnership with Outfront, there are 5 smaller, at the time they were called state-of-the-art, but they are now smaller, digital screens that Outfront do sell to advertising clients. And thankfully, the Square does get a share of the sales commission from those 5 screens, which enables us to support the day-to-day running costs of the Square and also to operate our 5 community screens that we use on public events, and increasingly the realization during the post-pandemic to partner up with Toronto Metropolitan University, OCAD-U, Toronto Biennial of Art, and many others in giving the 5 screen assets that we have to other partners who are producing artistic content. But today, I was going to briefly talk about In the Wake of Progress. So this was a project that Artistic Director Naomi Campbell from Luminata approached Ed Batinsky, former TMU Ryerson graduate from the School of Digital Arts, or Photography as it was then known. Ed's work is pretty well known, probably to all of you. So 4 years ago, Naomi said to him, wouldn't it be great if we could do a project at Yonge Dundas Square? And at that time, I was working for Luminata as a freelancer, and this was going to be one of my projects that I worked on. And then with the pandemic, I got hired by the Square, so I ended up being the venue owner rather than the producer. There's a complicated story. Ed's work is truly fantastic. It's amazing. There are 27 screens that we approached to do this. It's the first time ever at Yonge Dundas Square was a screen takeover of this scale. It included the television screens, video screens in the Rogers shop and in Shoppers Drug Mart. Pretty much, we tried to get hold of every single screen that you could see from the Square. That took 2 years of negotiations to get to that. And then in the process of that, one of the screens towers was undergoing renovations, so we couldn't use that one. And one of the other screen partners declined for reasons only known to themselves. Anyhow, here we are, first couple of images of a full screen takeover, 35 minutes long of Ed's work. And you can see the power and scale of it, and the audience coming to the Luminato event who produced it and put people like David Suzuki on the stage and many others to bring attention to climate change issues. Does anyone know whereabouts in Canada this particular slide is? Don't imagine that pollution is somewhere else. This is nickel tail minings in Sudbury, just up the road. So you can see how magnificent a work it was when it's seen on so many screens around the Square. This is it at night with engine car blocks. For this particular moment, I've caught it. This is a compilation photograph, just to explain the logistics. These 4 gentlemen at the bottom are the tech crew. Not a single one of those screen partners shares time code or the same programming things. There's multiple formats here. This is like, and hence my photograph, because I'm a production nerd, the T1 fiber optic assembly in the bunker below Yonge Dundas Square. So we're basically hijacking all the media servers, all the way going down to Boston and back in one case, up to Montreal in another case, and coming back again to get these images onto the square. And up in the top corner is the fantastic Ed Batinsky, who, if you ever get the opportunity to work with him, he and his team are just so generous, so kind, demanding and challenging, quality high, all those things, but just fantastic. Never was there a shout. Now, I'm going to try and play this very quickly. We're going to close this up. This is for you to prepare yourselves to the end of every artistic experience, when the reality kicks in hard and sharp at 9 p.m. when you're done. So who knew, we didn't know at the time, in fact, that wonderful, glorious screen that we called the book during this whole process is in fact 9 different screens, and it takes about 28 seconds for the screens to flip over to the full, and pretty much nobody else has ever seen that happen. So there we go. So I'm going to...
That's a commercial hack.
That is... Yes, so we got permission to basically hack all these or override certain control protocols. That's how I would put it. And then at 9 o'clock, or at the end of the presentation, precisely, all the screens, depending on where the control rooms were, flipped over and started sending different messaging through their media servers. 2 small cautions. We didn't get a full technical rehearsal on one of those days because a certain media company, not branded cities, I will say, not out front, but another media company, the technician had fallen asleep on the couch in the office in Montreal and couldn't be woken up in time to switch over to our control system. And on one of the other nights, Ed Batinsky on the Bayonne Atrium Tower, the router up at the top of the tower failed, but luckily the screen froze in a perfect Ed Batinsky image, so we got away with it. So on that note, I shall hand over to the next one. Thank you for listening to me. Oh, hopefully we can flip. There we go.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today. We're super happy. I want to also thank Dave and his team. It's been an amazing experience meeting all of you people and meeting my panelists, my co-panelists. It's been lots of fun, so thank you again. I'm Cheryl. I work with a company called Moment Factory out of Montreal. We define ourselves as a multimedia entertainment company. What I do within that company, myself, my colleague Angela, who's over there as well, we work on large-scale permanent projects, and we work with architects, developers, building owners and operators to integrate digital enhancements and digital engagement into the building and a property experience that extends out also into the public realm. I would say that what we spend a lot of time doing is navigating the murky waters between civic, commercial, and creative, and making sure that we drive value for everybody so that we can move forward with our projects. I'm just going to speak really briefly. I started out my life as an architect, and I ended up leaving the profession because I felt that architecture at the time, this is the 90s, was really about architectural as a sculptural object and didn't take the experiential into it at all. And I went into the performing arts, did a lot of other stuff, and I feel like the profession right now, this is like a full circle moment for me, because the profession right now is realizing that we need to have dynamic materials and responsive materials and a way of creating architecture and spaces that is more fluid than what it has traditionally been. So again, really excited to be here today. At Moment Factory, our credo is we do it in public. So multimedia is not about a screen, and it's not about a mobile application. It's about how you bring people together to connect. We really like to refer to the campfire as a sort of driving principle in what we do. It's heat, it's safety, it's trust. We talked a lot about trust in many of the sessions this week and last. And it's about bringing people together, connecting amongst themselves, and also sharing stories. I think to me the whole notion of storytelling is really important. We can have these great screens, we can have beautiful content on them, but if you're not connecting with people on some kind of emotional level, it has no meaning. The other thing, sorry, before I go to this one, the other thing I find really interesting about the campfire, when we talk about fluidity, is the notion of a campfire is mutable. It's never the same thing. It's always shifting and changes, and that's part of our fascination with it. But it's also the community around it is always changing. People get added, people leave. Sometimes you're alone, sometimes you're not. And I feel that this is a really good parallel with our public spaces and with the built environment. So, when I talk about what we do at Moment Factory, I like to talk about how we create living experiences and how we drive value in what we do. And driving value is a very different thing. For the building operator and owner, it's about return on investment. What do I put into place? What are the elements that will get me my money back as fast as possible with as much profit as possible? And then we do, I would say, the ROE, which is the return on emotion, which is what the architects and their collaborators, such as ourselves, do, which is how you bring poetry and movement and excitement around a spatial experience. And one thing I want to address today is what I call, this is a new one, Angela hasn't seen this yet, return on vitality. It's what happens after. Like when you deliver an architectural project, you talk about day one delivery. We like to think about what happens after and how do you give agency and how do you give that building back to the community that's using it and surrounding it, right? If we're talking about specifying technology that's 10 to 15 years, you deliver it day one, what happens after that? How do you let people use it? So the projects I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to do two. One is more commercial, one is more institutional. I'm going to try and get it through really quickly, Sherry. But since I'm talking for Jin as well, I'm going to extend my time a little bit. But I think that that's what's really important is this notion of giving it back and how you give it back and how it takes on meaning for a community. First project I'm going to talk about, hopefully I can start the video. Oops, no. How did you start the video, Julian? Oh, there, okay, thanks. Technology. So a beacon for the performing arts in Canada. This is the National Arts Centre in Ottawa. For those who aren't from Canada, it's a federally funded institution that is the home of the performing arts. So it produces productions. It also hosts productions as a touring house. But it's really where it's really the heart of how we push the performing arts within the city or within the country, but really from an institutional point of view. So this is a Diamond Schmidt design, Diamond Schmidt from Toronto. And if you look at the screens, I don't have a pointer, but in Diamond Schmidt's design, they reoriented the entrance onto Elgin Street. This space, this is right down from the Parliament buildings. They closed the street off for events. What's interesting about the screen that ClearLED designed was it's a transparent mesh. So it doesn't, well, I'll show you on the next page. And there's also blades on the side that are LED technology that engage with people on a human scale at the street level. So if we talk about the technology in the system, it's a transparent, so what it allows, I think most of all, and how it sort of enhances the architectural concept is that it creates an immersive threshold. So it creates a porosity between the outside and the inside. So as you step outside, it's not, here's a door, we don't want you to come in. There's this transparency that invites you in, and it actually creates a beautiful building or a beautiful space with the light coming in when there's no content on the screens, but it also creates this really kind of immersive environment when there is content. So there's a real connectivity, and it works obviously day to night. I want to talk about really quickly, if you look at the top images, when we talk about the day one experience, how do you create excitement around a place as well? Like the storytelling is not just about what's shown in the screens or what the content is, but it's also about how it lives over time. And I think if you look at the top left photo, how do you get excitement around a place? Well, you invite the royals. So Charles and Camilla came for the ribbon cutting initially. So that gets excitement. Day 2 was actually Canada Day. So Moment Factory produced content with the Maple Leafs sort of moving and dancing around. And again, they closed the street off in front of it for Canada Day celebrations. So that gets the excitement going day 1. And then how do you keep that excitement going? And I think, again, federally funded, so it's a different issue. But what happened is the NAC actually started to curate art. So the top left is the first curated piece they did in collaboration with Moment Factory. They took the work, we actually collaborated with Christy Belcourt, who's a Métis artist, for the first National Indigenous Peoples Day, and we helped her adapt her work to this canvas, which is a really unusual canvas. And I think never be afraid to have an unusual canvas. The 16:9 is so, overrated in my opinion, but don't be afraid to have an unusual canvas. And after this, they kind of went, oh, this is really interesting. Maybe instead of hiring Moment Factory, maybe we'll hire somebody internally. And they have a full-time producer who works developing content. So it's used at different points of the year to highlight, bring in artists that highlight diversity, that highlight the LGBTQ community, different communities. This is only 3. If you go on their Twitter page, Kipnis Lantern, it's crazy how much stuff that they produce. It's really interesting. But then they also connect to the community. So obviously, messaging that talks about truth and reconciliation, International Day of Pink, Remembrance Day. So really connecting to the community and having the community want to use this canvas for their events. I think that's it. I'm going to just talk about one more thing. So again, as I said, federally funded, it gives you a lot more opportunities than what you would have in a commercial space. And I think one thing, if I go back to the technology around this, yes, there was the screens, but there's also an interactive system that allows it. It's not currently interactive, it's not currently data generated, but the system is there to do that. So when we talk about renewal, we can talk about content renewal, which is putting up new photos or new content, visual content, but it's about how you make the experience evolve. So the second project I'm going to tell you is going to be telling you how we can do this. So this is, AT&T Discovery District, AT&T campus. So in Dallas, there's 4 buildings that sort of frame this public space. There's 4 media features, so this big, enormous high-resolution screen. There's also a sphere, the globe over to the left, and a trellis. The system that runs it connects all of these things. So whatever's playing on the screen, the colors and the movement is picked up and transferred onto the other canvases to really kind of not populate the space, create a more immersive environment for the public and for the community. So I think that that's really important, this notion of having a multi-canvas ecosystem that's connected through the same system. And when we talk about content renewal, and I'm going to finish on that, we created, 2 years later, they realized the screen was being used as a backdrop and being used, they would put stages in front of it and it would be the set design. So what we designed with the system that Moment Factory specified in this is that we actually created I guess a set, a light and sound show and set that responded to the music. So we have different programs. One is hip hop rap, one is pop music, one is rock and roll. So depending on what music is playing, the backdrop actually responds and makes a live show behind the performance. So I think this starts to get really interested when we're talking about responsive environments, but we're also talking about there's a system, there's a canvas that's set up, we see how this space is used, and then we can respond to it and program it to better serve the community that's using those spaces. So for me, again, when we talk about city as exhibition space, it's not just about putting up works of art, but it's about activating it. And I think the notion of bringing in music and having the music also as an exhibition and also as a live participant in the space is really important.
right, now we're going to pull into a bit of a conversation here. We have a couple of mics. Julian, I'm going to start with you while I do this changeover here.
Not necessarily that I speak first. I'm just a microphone keeper.
No. You are going to speak first as well. So I think, Julian, with your different roles and also having come from a technical production background, et cetera, can you talk about what it is you consider then when you're thinking about the public realm, outdoor space, and what are sort of the signifiers that start to transform it into an exhibition space or a stage?
Good question. And for some of you who aren't from this city, when I was doing Nuit Blanche here for the city, we'd commissioned somewhere in the region of 40 to 50 different temporary art projects to be executed that single night. And many of those projects were not in the first ideal, optimal location for that particular artist. In fact, I remember one project, we moved the project 12 times during the course of development before we finally landed on a location that could offer sufficient resources, should we say, for it to go ahead. And part of that challenge in production head is power. Can you drive a truck on or off? And all those really frustrating, mundane, necessities sometimes. But sometimes it just is finding the right person in the building. We used to call it with the key, and it doesn't necessarily mean the key to a particular door or a particular electrical panel. It actually means the key conceptually for the building owner. Many of the building owners may well be remote. They're not from the city. They don't know the impact of Nuit Blanche on Toronto, for example. And you need that brain key holder, if we want to, project champion in other language, and you need to find them and find them fairly swiftly in order to get your project rolling and moving forwards. But then to switch hats, now that I'm at Yonge Dundas Square, trying to get 27 different screens to speak to each other, even the ones that belonged or were operated by the same company didn't necessarily speak to each other. And they go, oh yeah, we do screen takeovers all the time. But actually, if you look at some of those screen takeovers, the image, in one particular case, there's Alan Hawco for a CBC tier, jumped from one screen to another. There were gaps. The content was written to take into account the fact that you couldn't do it as a seamless entity. You actually accepted the fact that there was going to be interludes, however short, between the character moving from one screen to another. Ed was adamant that they were all driven at the same time from the same time code, and that proved to be quite an epic challenge. Last piece is just how can we get the screeners, and Kim's colleagues at Cadillac Fairview are potentially an exception to this, and I applaud them for it, is in making themselves accessible for this type of conversation. And that's not necessarily the case, not just at Yonge Dundas Square, but in many other locations, not just Toronto. So I should pass the mic on, I think.
I think if you hand it over to Kim. And meanwhile, we were having a conversation at lunch, and there's some research that's being done and actually talking to a lot of different sign holders internationally. So if you bring up a question at the end about that, that would be great. And Kim, you brought up this idea of the digital media tech writer and the idea of a commitment to the quality of a space and the discussions that you have. So, the idea of the public realm and architecture and how it intersects then with landlords or tenants, how do you negotiate that conversation with them where they want to be able to constantly be in competition, right, and push their own brand forward, and at the same time have to realize that they are, whether they like it or not, a collaborator with all of these other things that are happening? So can you give a little insight into either a challenge or some potential solutions or the way that you handle those conversations?
So I think that we have a lot of different properties across the country, and we have, I mentioned before, we have TD Centre, we have Eden Centre, we've got Chinook, we have a beautiful centre in Laval. And a lot of these places, there's a twofold component to them, because obviously we're landlords, there's a mall, you know, there's a commercial aspect to it. But in a lot of these spaces, there's opportunity for public experience, and that's where brand can come into it, because in a lot of cases a retailer may say, hey, you've got this great screen in this area that you're kind of creating as you're making it a place, you know, you're creating places, place-making moment. And that's interesting for a lot of different retailers because they do want to have the exposure. Oftentimes they're quite keen to share a brand with us, so they'll have their artwork and we'll have our you know, our header on it or our bit of branding on it. And so we're able to sort of work together in that sense. But in other cases where we have brands that want to do their own thing and use a space, that's where the digital media writer really comes in, because it's important that they understand there's a responsibility. One of the, it's kind of a silly example, but it's a good example in the sense of trying to understand what a brand is trying to get across. And I always use it. I think my whole team is like, find another example. But it's with H&M, because H&M has done, you know, they're sort of on the border of brand and advertising. And one of the things that we never want to do is see sale or $49.99 or, you know, a third party representing themselves on their own. And but they understand how to sort of, you know, whatever you think of H&M, they understand how to talk about their brand. So they'll start off with, and this is where the example always becomes the same because I describe it the exact same way, of these beautiful Scandinavian models like running across a field and their hair is blowing, and you know, there's lots of wonderful lavender and a bunch of stuff, and they're all in these dresses, and then the content will, then the scene will fade, and then you'll see a close-up of one of those dresses, and then it'll fade, and then you'll see a price, and then it'll fade, and then we're back to another bunch of models sort of running through the fields. Maybe it's a different field, I don't know. But the whole thing is that it's not, there's some storytelling in there. And I think that's a really important aspect about it. So placemaking and storytelling are important for the landlord, because in a lot of cases, like the properties I was mentioning at the beginning, people will say, oh yeah, I'll meet you at Chinook Court. Right, like you know, there's a massive screen there that runs around. These areas become placeholders and placemaking, so people can say, yeah, I'll meet you here, or I'll meet you just outside of the H&M on Dundas, or you know, where there's that really big screen, I'll meet you there. And so for the landlord, that becomes important, because you definitely want to have that circulation. You want to be associated with something. So when you do have those celebrities that are, you know, doing a selfie with your screen in your particular area, like that does a double, it's got a kind of a double whammy effect. So I don't know if that's totally answered the question.
Yeah, that helps to explain how it's an advantage to them directly, but also to the place. Mm-hmm. And I think this idea of a story and a narrative keeps coming up. I think one of my greatest tipping point moments in Midnight Moment was during one of our selection committee meetings. One of the sign holders, I gave him a piece of work that was a bit more abstract. And I showed it, and a very well-renowned artist. And then this advertiser just said, yeah, but you know, where's the narrative in it? Mm. And I was like, wow, now we've moved the needle. Mm-hmm. But it is that idea of thinking about it and understanding how important it is when they saw the examples of being able to tell a story. So Cheryl, you gave a couple of examples, and one was starting from, you know, working with a museum and then understanding that sort of nonprofit role, and then a commercial one. So is there a particular difference in how Moment Factory approaches projects when one starts off from a commercial client, but they still want to be exceptionally creative, may even involve an artist, and when you're looking for something that's a little more open-ended or openly sort of supporting the brand of culture?
So I think you made a good point about the person you were discussing, one of the sign holders talking about narrative. And I think that's where there's a difference, is that when you're working with a building owner or somebody who sees a commercial value in it, even if it's not directly revenue generating content, is there's a messaging behind it, like the H&M. There's some kind of narrative or discourse that they want to push forward, that they want people to interpret that visual, even if they're working with an artist, interpret it in a specific way. Even if it's about brand experience or brand spirit or place spirit, it still has a messaging to it. Whereas I think that if you're integrating purely artistic work, you're leaving it open-ended for interpretation, and you're leaving it more in the audience's hands of how they can experience that content. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I mean, are there any special ways that you handle also the relationship with that client, in essence? Do you have, and maybe you don't, so this is a real earnest question, you know, is there a difference in how you have those conversations about what creative content, the duration of the piece, or how you want it to run, you know? So for example, when you have an incredible sort of multi-screen environment, would you approach it differently if it was a museum having a conversation with you wanting to activate it, or if it's a brand?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to that, my return on investment, return on emotion, return on vitality, because when you're talking with a brand, it's going to be about what value do you hope to get from this? Do you want to influence people to come in? Do you want to influence people to purchase something? Do you want to just do brand positioning, for instance? Whereas if you're working more with a cultural institution, it'll be about imparting culture or telling a larger story about what that institution is trying to achieve. But I think it's still doing it maybe more in an artistic way, like for instance, the National Arts Center projects. It's not as clear, it's not clear messaging in the same way. It's more about the value or the mission of that institution and what they're trying to accomplish.
Mm. And so, Julian, when you were talking about Ed Beretsky's piece and, you know, the exacting nature of how he wanted to execute something, what he wanted to have happen, you know, was there an action or a particular outcome that the artist was looking for from that particular experience?
Ed thinks very hard and very long about so many issues that are facing us in this world. And he has an incredible long repertoire or archive. And almost at the start, the conversation was that this is almost like a retrospective of all his work in a public location. And then the more as Ed and his collaborative team, and included a sound composer, Phil Strong, Bob Ezrin producing it, all fantastic people, it migrated into much more of a story he wanted to tell, not about his career, but also about the planet and about how we react to it. And it became even more visceral when we started doing some secret overnight testing on some of the screens about this particular location. You know, it is arguably the busiest intersection in the whole of Canada. 80 to 100,000 people cross that intersection as pedestrians every single day, albeit not in the pandemic so much, but and is one of only 2 locations in Toronto where the billboard industry is allowed to show video rather than static images. So the other one is along the Gardiner Expressway. It's much harder to tell a story along the Gardiner Expressway because most of the viewers are in a car, and unless they're stuck in a traffic jam, they're not going to see the whole story or narrative on their journey. Ed really wanted to sculpt the piece, and content changed, location of content changed as he and his team responded to standing in the space and looking at what other activities happen there all year round.
And then I guess, Cheryl and Julian, when you're looking at supporting work that's going to happen in this space, and particularly because, you know, you've got examples where the screens are surrounding the viewer, how much do you think about, or how much do the people who are creating the creative content either stand in that space or think about the realities of the point of view and the experience of the space when you're creating for work like that? And also because, Cheryl, you're creating internationally, so, you know, how does that factor in the physical experience of a place?
I think it's critical. I think it's really critical to bring the creatives on the space, to have them, because you can have the most beautiful rendering. There's a physical reaction we get in space that you can't reproduce in a drawing. You can't reproduce in a VR. You just can't. It's just not the same. The smells, the sounds. I think that's really important. And we choose to work with creatives as well that understand space, because it is a space of illusion. If you've got a screen surrounding you, you've got an actual physical space, but you can trick the mind with the depth that you create, with the light, with the, you know, and when you bring in sound and you do spatialized sound, you're going on a whole different level about how people experience space and the illusion you can create. So it's absolutely essential.
And then, Julian, do you bring people in to the space? So if people have concepts of things they want to do, or have a large event there, you know, what is your process? Do you ever have anybody walk them around, or?
Yeah,
How does
I mean,
it happen?
the extraordinary thing about both about Nuit Blanche and also about Yonge Dundas Square and other public spaces in this city and elsewhere, there are no doors. So the invitation is there 24/7, 365 days a year, whether you like it or not. They're coming to your space, you know, the general public and everything else in between, including, you know, rogue marketeers and pamphleters and protesters. We had 77 protests last year at Yonge Dundas Square during the course of the year. And that's their automatic right. That's part of the Canadian Charter of Rights, you know. We are not there to stop them doing that. So our audience is broad and diverse. And the fantastic thing about doing In the Wake of Progress and many other projects is you're surprising people. They've come to downtown Toronto to do something else. They're on the way to see the Harry Potter show, or they're going to Little Catterall, or they're going to shop in the Bayon Atrium or Eaton Centre or wherever. They might be coming out of the cinema across the street, and they get surprised. And I love that moment of total surprise, that they're coming across something that they hadn't planned for in their minds, and then they stay. There were people on that cycle of Ed's work was 35 minutes, and we ran it 6 times, just about, in the 3-hour window that we had. And you would have thought some people would see a moment of it and just walk away. It's amazing how many people were still there, having seen it 4 times or 5 times.
And
Can I just add to that quickly?
sure.
I think we like to call them unexpected moments of delight. But I think another thing that's important about having it in the public sphere, you don't have a captive audience, but you're seeing it from different points of view. And your brain works differently if you're moving than if you're still. So you're receiving the information in a different way. Not information, you're receiving the art piece in a different way, and you're experiencing it differently.
Yeah, we found there was one text-based piece that we did with the Nelson Mandela Foundation in Times Square, and we realized that we had to, they had to create the text 5 times longer than you would when you would view it like in a movie theater, because of just the physical experience of everything that's happening peripherally, et cetera, to capture your attention and to keep it. So that being able to be in that space and understand the realities of that are absolutely crucial. Otherwise, it just goes by. But you touched upon something, Julian. So Kim, I wanna ask you the incredible 2 to 3 year period in which our lives were altered. Yes. The period of years that we all have sort of forgotten. But if we go back to that, especially because I don't know if other people experienced it, there were a lot of online symposiums about placemaking, and all of a sudden our public realms became really important. Our outdoor spaces got more consideration, what we would give to them. And I just wonder, you know, what were some of the things that you did as a landlord, and what were you considering as far as creativity to think about that relationship of public realm, you know, to the property that you have? And were there any great finds from that you never would have tried before, that you found worked and maybe have actually fed their way into how you consider the public realm on your properties?
Well, one of the things that we did was we created outdoor cinemas. And we did that in a few of our different properties. And that was pretty interesting because it harked back to those days. I don't know how many people remember this, but I remember with my parents, we would go see movies at the drive-in, right? And I had to get that thing that's stuck on the side of the car for the volume, and I was always in my pajamas, and it was, this big thing. But it was interesting because during COVID, those sold out, and I think we just needed to know how many people were going. I don't think it was an exorbitant amount of money, but we needed to know how many people were going so we could plan things out. And I would say in the past, something like that would have taken us a lot longer to do. But to figure out how to get a screen that size and how to make it happen really quickly, like we were more nimble than I've ever seen us. So that was kind of interesting. And then, I mean, I wouldn't say, I started saying this at the beginning, we still have an opportunity to grow for sure. Like there is a lot of space in the digital realm that I don't think we've even really tapped into. And so there's amazing opportunities. I know we're talking to Moment Factory as well. But some of the other things that we did they weren't so digitally based, but there was a small digital component, but it was kind of more low tech. So we would do, the largest patio out in the property. We did that at Sherway Gardens, and we also had aspects where we did like an ice skating, kind of a curling golf kind of thing. So those weren't really digitally based, but I guess for us it was just a matter of being able to react quite quickly, because it's not so easy to, when you have a property like at Sherway, you've got residential around, so you can't just slap on a screen and just play whatever you want to play. You have light limitations. There's light laws out there that won't allow you to do certain things. So there's permits that have to happen. Julie and I were talking about those because they're so fantastic to get, and the city doesn't hardly have any of them to deal with. No restrictions at all.
In this city, do you actually get the permit in advance? The frightening thing with with Times Square, even though we manage the space on behalf of the city, we'd never get our permit until literally like half an hour before the event was going to start.
Yeah, I think that's a New York thing. Things kind of roll that way, but but in Toronto, yeah, my experience has been that we definitely need to have it before we do anything. I have more experience on building permit side, but with those, yeah, from what I've understood, we've had to have it before we can kind of go rogue and do that. But it's interesting because when you think about something like the Eaton Centre, prior to COVID, that center has 56 million people that walk through it every year. Like, it's tremendous. And what Julian was saying about, people coming down and they're shopping, they're going to the theater. I mean, think of all the universities you have around that particular location. All of the events, the sporting events and et cetera. So, but 56 million people, that's a lot of eyeballs on, on screens. And I think a lot of our retailers don't fully understand the impact of that and what they can get from that. And it goes back to purpose, and it goes back to understanding storytelling and brand. But there's such an incredible opportunity for those stores. On one hand, we don't want everybody to be, there's over 300 stores in the Eaton Centre. You can imagine if every single store had digital media, that would be too much. So how do you balance it, right? How do you understand the scale, the depth between one store and the common area and another store? Talking about that whole aspect of understanding how you pace it, how you pace the content, and when it's such a short distance, when we're talking about more of a small scale, you have to think about those things as well. So there's a lot that we've learned. There's a lot that retailers, I think, have learned, and now I've really felt that retail is coming back. There's almost like a renaissance that's happening a little bit, where we all know that you can buy a million things online. So if you're a retailer and you're still kind of thinking, hey, I'm going to have t-shirts that say 1977 in a bunch of different colors and buy two, get the third one free, like, nobody cares, right? Like, it's not enough to get you in there. So there has to be something extraordinary, and that has to be an idea of experiential moments as well as service. That's a whole other symposium. I won't bore you with that. But I just think it's really important. That's a differentiating factor, right, between online and not. So we've been conscious of that, and we've tried to bring that point across to our clients.
Yeah, and that idea of being able to offer something different is also fits in with what you're both talking about too, about this idea of the art can bring either, the moments of delight, the surprise, or, what we've called a commercial break in the past. And so now you can also see that there's a bit of an incentive to actually sometimes turn off a little bit of the advertising in order for people to pay attention to then when the advertising is turned back on, it's noticed. And I think frequency and duration is something that we were talking about on our call before. And also, Cheryl, when do you advise clients between, oh yeah, that's something that should be a temporary screen, or you should actually use an existing architecture that's there? When is it important to actually pop up or create a kind of temporary moving image environment? Or do you primarily work with the embedding of the permanent screen or the architecture?
Give me a second on that one. I think we don't always work like this, and I think we have different teams within Moment Factory, some that do more of the pop-up events, some that do the permanent. We cross-pollinate as well. To me, the ideal situation is that you start activating a space before there's construction. And this is me speaking, not necessarily my company, but before there's construction, because, and I think we were talking about it in the workshop yesterday, you can create meaning before you have a permanent structure. And you can create a place already, and you can get feedback, and you can get, like if you look what's being done on the Bentway or the presentation this morning, I think the pop-up is a lead-in to creating memory and collective memory around a site. And then if you know that there's going to be there's a construction project that's going on for 5 to 10 years, you're already building value around that construction project and creating a sort of community engagement with that area. And so the placemaking can happen way ahead of time, and then it continues once you've delivered the building.
Yeah, so being able to start establishing the behavior in a place and what they come to expect before then the permanent infrastructure is actually there. Yep. And what about, so Julian, as far as frequency, and duration of events that happen in the public space, how do you consider, is there a rule of thumb now in the square as far as like how long an event should be when you're inviting a lot of public? Do you have a certain amount of advice that you give in relationship to this? Is there a period that's too long, too short, too great? And then if it needs to sync with the screens, how much time does one usually get?
Oh, that would be luxury.
I know.
we particularly the last year and this year, we are scrabbling hard to get back up to the number of event days, as they're called. Pre-pandemic, we do about 175 to 200 days of some kind of activation on the square. With the pandemic, it dropped. We did filming, because filming was allowed. So we were in Star Trek, Handmaid's Tale, Titans. If any of you know a few of those films, young Dundas Square pops up in those during the pandemic, gritty and urban. Most of our event producers, our events, we typically, as a square, do not produce events. We wait for the client to come to us. And some of those, about 40% of those are community-based clients, about another 40% are commercial. The gap in between is a little bit of us, but also the City of Toronto. And the City of Toronto can get access to the square because ultimately it owns it, so it can override everybody and do events, which often are fantastic. We did 10 days of Nuit Blanche activation last year. The project, like Ed Batinsky's work, took 4 years from that first approach to actually execution. And to give an order of magnitude, the 3 hours for 2 nights, the screen value of that, if you add up all those screens, was apparently $5 million. And without the extraordinary gift of those brand operators and building owners enabling that screen time to happen, I don't think any real producer in this city could afford to do that on any frequent basis. That said, with people like OCADU and TMU and others, we do nimble stuff with smaller screen presentations on the square. We've turned those around in as little as 10 days.
And then just for people to know, the logistics. Do people have to sort of load in, set up and everything during the lovely hours of like midnight and 6 a.m. or something?
One wishes, but because of noise bylaws, we're not supposed to do anything past 11 o'clock and before 7 a.m. Although last week we had a Canadian Blood Services maze to bring attention to blood donations, and the only way that physically, because it was a maze made out of grit block, like you see on the patio, street patios, they needed to start quietly overnight, not playing any music and using rubber mallets to bash it all together so that the local residents weren't upset.
I just used to have those unfortunate conversations with artists where it was like, no, you will load in your entire show between 12 and 6 a.m. And they were used to doing like 2 or 3 days of load in or something. And I'm like, no, it's just going to be between midnight and 6 a.m. And that's just the way it's going to be. I think, one of the things that we had talked about is ambition and the realities of cost, time, and how can we enable more work to happen? And I think, Julian, since you've still got the mic, you had a concept about potentially how to fund artistic exhibition.
Well, what I would like, and this is more personal really than my official hat here, is that when jurisdictions such as or municipalities such as Toronto give permission through their billboard tax permitting billboard process, is that they agree with that screen owner operator some kind of community rotation. And it need not be necessarily every day or every month, but they agree that a certain number of minutes or a certain number of hours per year are given over to some kind of coordinated, I'm not saying free for all, but coordinated, curated, programmed. It'd be fantastic to have your good services doing that for Yonge Dundas Square from time to time, working with amazing artists and bringing their work to the palette of the buildings and screens around us. Incidentally, in Toronto, every single billboard, whether you're a static display sign or a moving screen, you do pay the City of Toronto billboard tax based on the square footage, square meterage, not based on the revenue. And even for my 5 community screens, we are a city-owned entity, we pay billboard tax to the City of Toronto.
Right, and I don't know, well, there are a lot of really sophisticated people in this room, but you realize that, of course, that the signs are actually considered property and are adhered to like as if it was an office building or something, so it has the same kind of taxes, restrictions, and et cetera. But the other thing...
In fairness, though, and I'm being a bit provocative here, the billboard tax in Toronto, although it doesn't directly go to the arts community, when the billboard tax was introduced, the City of Toronto increased the grant or per capita to the Toronto Arts Council by what they thought was the equivalent amount. So it did actually float that way to the artists.
But the other thing I liked that you had mentioned was the idea is that then, if some of that time was taken, so in other words, let's say there is, like you mentioned, 10% of the time is over to, PSA/cultural use. And then if it's not all used and that sign holder then sells some of that allotment, they have to put it back into the pot to actually fund the activity. So this is really important. A lot of planning permissions and such, if you don't specify the specific use of the screen or a percentage of time, it makes it very difficult to go back to a sign holder and say, give up some of your revenue time. However, if you start out very early on saying a percentage of time is going to be given over, if it's not used, they can always sell it, but a portion of that then would go back. And in this way, we could have this self-sustaining system of being able to ensure that commissions and such were paid for, as opposed to artists very often donating that service. And Cheryl, one thing you brought up in the presentation was this idea of the multi-screens and thinking about the ecosystem. And you know, while Dallas has this wonderful example of being able to do it in one place, I mean, can we think about, you know, a little bit like, you know, how Nuit Blanche, can we think about how we actually extend a multi-screen experience, like either across the city or a portion of a city, or, you know, create a journey? What could we do?
Ideally, yes. Ideally, yes. I feel like where it gets interesting, I think, you know, Dundas Square is interesting, Times Square is interesting, but if you explode that out even further, and I think we're getting into, you know, these whole notions of the connected city and the smart city, where that might be even possible. And I've spoken to some people that are actually working as consultants with different cities on how you start mandating that. And I think one thing that might help is a sort of better connection of the technology, or better, like, you know, when Bluetooth came in, for instance, that everybody and all the manufacturers were using it. How do you have a system that allows that to happen easier? Because I think one of the big challenges is the technology. But I think that you can imagine, I would love to imagine this, a whole notion of nodes, or a web that connects all of those nodes so that that can occur.
Or at least they could be on the same time clock.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if all our phones can tell the same time at the same time, why? Anyway.
Exactly, and I think it doesn't have to be, I think, you know, the examples I showed were big and expensive, but if you can get, it can be smaller interventions, it can be lighting interventions, it can be small sound interventions. The Quartier des Spectacles in Montreal has a whole lighting plan in the downtown area that coordinates when there are events going on. So I think that that's a really interesting thing. And if you get, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but the National Arts Center, it was paid for by a private donation. So then if you start getting private individuals who are willing to get, like, so it's business, so what is it, civic community and creativity.
Civic commercial
creativity, but if you also start getting the community involved and people who are willing to own that.
Similarly related, I was going to say from the commercial perspective, like if we're, you know, talking about retailers and their interest in doing things, I think just being able to understand, and this might sound really basic, but they do struggle with it, understanding the right format, you know, for the content that they're putting through. You know, is that size screen the best type of way in which you want to present that, or do you need to do something a little bit more intimate and have more of them? And what does that look like? And I think that's something where we could do a better job of, maybe we have more screens and we say, hey, what about this kind of opportunity for you? Like right now in a lot of our properties, we have screens on elevators, right? So you buy that and they wrap around. So it's not just front facing. So there's like a three-dimensional, you know, kind of like there's an architectural moment to it, but just helping them understand that. Because I think a lot of retailers really struggle with continuous content.
Yeah.
They're good out of the gates. They've got something great. And then when you say, okay, well, if we want to repeat this, what does that look like? Well, we haven't got to that campaign that far, or you know. So I just think making the whole process a little bit easier.
Yeah, there are some of those. That's just my voice. You know, for Midnight Moment, you have to. Every artist does a vertical, a horizontal, and then a multi-channel submission. And then from that, you can composite anything. So if does that work? I don't know. I've talked so much that I've killed the mic. You know, that there are those tricks that we can do to enable things to be more spontaneous. So I'm going to ask everybody I'm going to start with you, Kim, since you got the mic. And one thing I've asked them is they each get a like 0 to 30 second plea. So everybody listen up, because you might be coming at it from a different angle, but they're going to all ask for one thing that they wish, and you might be able to fulfill it. So Kim, go ahead.
So I would like, it's not even Christmas yet, I would like retailers to really understand that digital is not this far-off fantasy. You know, when you have massive brands that have worked it into their budget and they fully understand the importance of it, the placemaking, the branding, the storytelling, everything. But then you have mid-sized brands, or you have smaller, and a lot of them you know, steer away from it because they're nervous about, in their mind, the only thing that they think about is the cost of the screens. Right. They haven't even hit the content. And that's a massive problem because who cares? If you have the screen, you play the same thing over and over again, right? So that my wish would be that retailers would understand the importance of it and see the flexibility, see how nimble it can be. Yeah, the screen is an investment. Yes, you do have to take the content production into that costing, but wow, the things that you can get out of it, because it's not just about commercial, then it can be art. You know, you can imagine if you had a whole mall full of retailers that did, you know, each of them had a different type of screen, and you were able to connect them and then turn all of those on. Do Ed Brudzinski in all, sorry Ed, but do all of those, you know, using that format, you know, like talk about a placemaking, talk about kind of an event. It could be really neat. So I think retailers need to get on, get on board.
Embrace it.
Embrace it, that's the word, yeah. That's what I'm looking for.
Great.
Okay, I think my plea is more out to the designers and to the architects and the building owners, and how you really have to think about the experience you want to create. It's not just about, here, let's put digital media, but it's about how is that holistically integrated into an overall experience for your users. And then it's not just about the technology, but it's about what system is running, what allows the things that Kim is talking about, what allows the things that Julian is talking about to occur, so that you're really immersing an experience and creating a responsive experience as well.
Excellent. Julian?
I'm delighted to be in the company of these three fantastic people because I'm learning a great deal. So I wish to be in their company more often. Back to the Bentway, I used to say if I had $1 for every car that drove over the top of us, I would never need to rely on philanthropy or city funding. I have a similar phrase now for Yonge Dundas Square. If I had $1 for every single advert that I could see from the square, we would not need any city support forever.
Excellent. I like the idea of these very positive surcharges. Okay, we're opening it up to the audience for questions. We've got about 10 minutes. Anyone? I believe it's Julian up there, right? Oh, we got several. Right.
Hi, I'm Taki, and thanks for such a fantastic discussion. My question is from Cheryl. Like Julian mentioned, those specific keys that you have to trigger while working on buildings. So since you've been working internationally, so how many different kinds of the keys have you been juggling with so far, and what has been the outcome? Thank you.
I think the critical thing, especially internationally, is to be there physically, and that goes along with what you were saying about reading the space and visiting the space with your clients, but also being there with the number of different clients, because every culture, every country deals with hierarchy in a different way, and so being around the space, being able to read people, discuss people, workshop. That's how you understand who has the power and who has the influence and who the real decision makers are, because it's not necessarily just the title they have. So I think to me that's the real key, is being on site and being live with people.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed your projects very much. Thank you. I apologize, this is a very self-serving question. My major nemesis these days is transportation engineers who consider moving light with content a recipe for traffic accidents. And so they are able to get in the way of, I think, some very interesting projects. So my question to you is have you encountered that particular group and how you overcame that hurdle? And if not, are there some detractors that you haven't discussed that have gotten in the way of some interesting work, and how you've overcome those hurdles?
Wow, that needs a whole symposium.
I can answer about the transport.
I can too, yeah.
I've got a riff. You go first.
Okay, well, I'll speak quickly. We did a bridge project in Montreal, the Jacques Cartier Bridge. We have two kinds of lighting: one projected lighting on the inside of the bridge while the cars are driving, and one LED lighting on the exterior. And so that is about choosing the right technologies. So being able to achieve what we wanted, but it's like, okay, all the cool stuff is going to happen on the outside because it's not going to affect the traffic. And then on the inside, it's just about color washes, and it doesn't really affect. So I think it's really about technology and saying, this is the experience we want to create. This is how we can do it in a way that doesn't affect traffic or animals. We had to do a huge maritime life study as well because it's over water.
Actually, my wife produced a project involving Moment Factory in Banff National Park a few years ago. And actually we had to, talking of detractors, we had they had 8 different wildlife specialists as to whether the Bluetooth-enabled multimedia presentation to groups of 8 to 20 at a time would have impact on the wolves, the bears, even the earthworm study, in case the patrons trod on some unsuspecting insect during the course of the night. But to flip that around, City of Toronto, Louis Blanche many years ago now, we commissioned a series of works from a First Nations artist, and they were basically Aboriginal pictograms. And they were supposed to go on those temporary road traffic signs that you see saying slow down, construction ahead. They are digital. You plug a USB key in with those pictograms, and you can rotate them through. So I asked the city's transportation department if we could borrow 25 of their trailer-mounted display screens, to be told no. And all the way up to the Director of Transportation, the answer was no. And all the way across to other directors in other departments, the answer was still no. And it all came back down again to me. So we went to a commercial company and we rented 25 digital display screens for road traffic management. And we did the artwork on Bloor Street. I took pictures of all that artwork, and not a single vehicle was involved, nor did it have an accident, because we closed the road off for the entire night to enable the work to happen. And the head of transportation in the remaining 3 years at City Hall never spoke to me again.
Yeah, very often with transport, what I would do is look at the existing content that is okay, that is on those screens, and then get the information about, the movement ratio, et cetera, and then you just establish that your work is no more. I can't remember the technical terms, but it doesn't strobe any faster than that or work many more frames per second. And then, so precedent's always, always, always helpful. Get that information and then you compare yours to that. But I know getting around the things, you're not allowed amplified sound in Times Square after 10 p.m. because, it's so quiet there. And you don't want to upset the residents or something. But so we once, I had the director of operations, who's now the president of the Alliance, said to me once, he's like, Sherry, aren't you doing a film shoot with that artist? Because a film permit allows you to have amplified sound. And I was like, why, yes, Tom. In fact, we will be doing a music video. And so that was the way we were able to get around live performance. So find a precedent. All right, we had a couple of other questions.
Thank you.
Got down here, got Christian, Pat.
Thank you. Since the title of the symposium is a city as exhibition space, almost every exhibition nowadays have the possibility for the users to interact. So what potential do you see in interaction experiences or in more democratic participation of the people?
I don't know who wants to answer that one first.
I can answer. We've got a lot of retailers now that are actually looking to the integration of touchscreen at their storefronts, and while it seems like, oh yeah, touchscreen happens everywhere, but for a retailer, that's just dealing with the sheer size of some of those storefronts. Some of them are 120 feet, so it's from that perspective. I think there is an interest with engagement. Obviously, that's a much smaller scale than the scales that Julian and Cheryl are talking about. But I do think it's kind of interesting that there is that interest from retailers, right, to do that, and to think that, I mean, that's kind of it's almost like this virtual moment, right? You're not going into the store, you're not online, but then you're able to interact outside. So, and I also think from the retailer perspective, there can be challenges with that, because then is it kind of defeating the purpose? And then the landlord obviously has a perspective on that, because what if you have queues, and what if you have all this other kind of stuff? People get frustrated, or there's vandalism. So anyway, that's just sort of a small thing from a retail perspective, but.
It really comes down to the system as well. So there's two challenges. I think AT&T and NAC, the two projects I showed you, they do have the interactive systems. So even if they're not fully functional now, that can be added. You can do an add-on. So I think that's companies and institutions that understand that that's important are doing it in the back end. Because if it's not in the back end, you can't add it after. The challenges in civic spaces or in commercial spaces is that normally by the time a company like Moment Factory, an experiential company, comes in, the out-of-home digital media RFP has already gone out. Somebody's already specified the system and the screens. And once there's nothing we can do, right? When the commercial interests drive the purchase of digital media, it's nobody wins, I think. But yeah, that's the thing. So I think you need to shift almost the whole building owner return on investment thing, because they're thinking, if I put in a screen, I can make money, as opposed to thinking, if I bring in digital media, I can create a better experience for my users. So I think we need to really work with the architects as well and the designers, because they're in at the beginning, and they should be involved in how we develop these technologies. So it's not an AV supplier that's selling, or an out-of-home digital advertising company that's telling the client what to buy.
I think that's such a great point. I would add that even further in addition to that would be the developers, right? So that, because if you have a big development project that's happening, they're the ones with the money. They're the ones that are controlling everything. They're controlling the architects, all the consultants. So if that's the mandate, if that's sort of their vision, then they kind of everybody needs to walk to the same beat. But I think it starts up a little higher too.
I can make a quick plea. Because we have university students here as well, here's the plea. A lot of the outdoor advertisers have said that the biggest limitation that they have is the creative content. So the screens have the ability to have a lot of interactivity. They have the ability to actually, I don't even understand this, but have an AR interface, et cetera. But they're really frustrated by the fact that there is a lack, even in the commercial realm, of creatives actually understanding how to use the technology and going there. So I'm saying go out there and be adventurous and ambitious, because actually the technology is there, and there's a lot of problem in actually being able to take advantage of it. So don't hold back, actually, when you're thinking about what you might be able to do, because that's been the biggest problem. And one of the reasons why creative content of artists is starting to happen on screens is because the artists are pushing the way and the expectations and the movement, et cetera, of what can happen on the screens. And so selfishly, that is the reason why cultural content is getting on the screens, because that sets a competitive level that forces the commercial clients to work even harder to have great creative content. So that's part of what's holding it back. And I guess we have one, do we have time for one more quick question, and then we can, and then you can just ask us all sorts of questions and breaks.
This was great, and you are all so fabulous that you kind of answered my question progressively as I continued to elaborate it for myself.
Bahaha, that was the plan.
Devious and scheming. But really it comes down to, again, and I think Cheryl just hit the nail on the head, as always, but the motivation for engaging in public space, and how is it that we just spend an hour together, or whatever it was, essentially talking about how we mitigate and sort of do interventions into the fact that we let the advertisers colonize our commons first. And when we talk about the stewardship of a developer, of a landowner, of a architect, of a design team, of studios like ourselves, if that pro forma, if that advertising free money just made it into the pro forma somehow for the way the building works, how are we letting that happen? We don't have the architect justify the view shed of the windows as a directly monetized thing. We don't have the landscape architect justify the trees and the shade that attract people, that create experiences because they're there. How did this happen? That's my question. And what do we do about it? And I think ROI, ROE, ROV is exactly the conversation we get, because it's about expanding that sense of motivation and not looking at the immediate thing and how do I mitigate my CapEx because I got to buy all these blinky lights. And then it's really a question of getting away from that and adding very cogent thing you said there, Kim, about the OpEx side and how do you feed this beast once you've made it. And what does that life cycle look like, and how does interactive and all this stuff? But back to the question, because I promise there is not just a provocation, but a question. It's like, how do we have these conversations as the rule? And because somehow advertisers just, in their panic about not having enough places to yell at us louder, have found these places and have proffered this free money, and municipalities are just complicit. Wants that?
Julian wants it. Julian's ready for it.
I'm not sure I'm quite ready for it, but I'm speaking very specific and very local to the city of Toronto. The unit of the billboard unit, sign wayfinding and billboard unit of the city of Toronto needs to be empowered more, and to be brutally frank, and I'm sorry to the developers and the retailers out there, you employ some very successful, extremely expensive lobbyists in the whole lawmaking bylaw process. So if the billboard units didn't have to listen to those lobbyists quite so hard, maybe the legislation, would change a little bit in that conversation. And the other piece that I've witnessed recently is that most billboard operators now are putting in new technology and putting it builder, and they're calling it an upgrade or a renovation. They're not basically saying, this is us starting all over again. This is the end of that contract, that agreement that was maybe 5 signs, 2 static and 2 small billboards and a ticker tape type thing, all of which 10 years later looks wonky. And they're putting in much bigger screens, much brighter screens, and yet it's billed and framed as a renovation or replacement of our assets. And actually, that's the point where municipalities like the City of Toronto could play catch-up and say, any application to change the previously permitted billboard, it's a complete rethink.
I mean, again, they're property. So very often, it's separate from maybe the developer of the building even. But, you treat it like property. And part of what Julian already talked about is thinking about an allocation of time. So you could put in a regulation that, every what do they call that? Electronic billboard had to have a certain percentage of time that's given over, regardless. Done. And then you have the obligation to take care of it. In that case, and by the time it gets to the advertisers, the people who are programming it, all of their financial targets and everything are based on then that reduced 90% as opposed to the 100%. The hardest thing is when you think you have a 100%, and you build out a financial projection for that, and then you're told, well, give me 10 of it back, well, then people get upset. So the thing is, think proactively, ask for a little bit more time than you need, because you can always give it back to them and let them sell it, and then hopefully it feeds back, and then it helps to keep this self-sustaining system. But, simply just make an allocation of time that always has to be given over. And then people plan around it.
I was told a phrase by a similar colleague in Calgary who's trying to take over that public space in a most beneficent and generous way that the city can't afford to run anymore. And he said, if I can control all of it, I can be incredibly generous. But if I have to ask anybody else, I'm in no position to further the opportunity or mandate of this public space.
One more thing, then we got to go.
Meet you halfway. As basic as this may sound, I actually think that there's a lack of education out there in terms of the power of what digital can do, and therefore it's not thought of. So to your point about, you know, the developers and the performer and everything like that, you know, we bust our brains figuring out, wow, should we do like a Cortone steel, or should that be, what should that be? Like some sort of like a, I don't know, like a sandstone or something, a magical, or oh, why don't we just do this big bloody glass curtain wall? Oh my God, and they, you know, falling off their chairs. But nobody goes, you know, actually, we could do something that could simulate those materials and be digital. Like, wow, I could have had a V8, you know? It's very, it's a moment where you think to yourself, why are you not seeing the possibilities? And I think that, I mean, part of this is an entirely another symposium, which I think would be fascinating actually as well. But just the aspect of when you think about where some of these, we've spent a lot of time talking about activation within the urban environment, but you know, within the suburban environment, because of the residential component, don't kid yourself, like that's a challenge, right? With the light, with the sound and all of that. So how do we start thinking about it? I think some people get scared about that. But we have to bring the conversation forward because it's so important now. And you know, years ago, if you said to a client, yeah, right, so your entire storefront is going to be digital screens, they'd say, you're crazy, and I'm just going to put up a poster of Huntington Beach. Thanks. But now the prices have come, like, it's all relative, right? I'm not saying, oh, everything is so inexpensive, but it's all relative. So things become more and more reasonable. And I just think that we have to catch up with the ambition and the motivation for it, because it can be fantastic. Like, digital is an amazing medium. And I think used properly and planned properly, the sky's the limit. And it doesn't have to be this architecture or advertising bad and social good and vice versa. You know, I think some of the plans that have, I love the idea of how we make it work financially, but I think it's the awareness and the education. I think that's really, really huge. So that is how I'll end my statement for today.
No, I have nothing to say right now.
Okay, Dave is going to have to take it back from us. Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. Thank you for all your time and your great questions.
Thank